Thanks for joining us again today, guys. Today is a really important tutorial, and we're just going to focus on fridges, because most questions we're going to get are going to be in relation to how long will a fridge run, in what temperature, and all these types of questions without knowing what the fridge is actually going to be running and so on and so forth. So the key question we're going to ask you is, how does your fridge work? And what voltage does it work with? And when does it cut out, when does it cut in, and what is its actually cyclic range? So if you don't know the answers to those questions, that's where you're going to run into issues every single time. And 99.9% of the times the customers have issues because you don't read the instructions. The instructions will tell you the cut in and cut out voltage of the fridge. And that's as simple as it is. You need to understand that. And that way you can say, well, is it the power source or is it the fridge? Is there an issue with either of them? The fact is that a fridge like this one here is a 95 litre and it has settings on it. It has low, medium and high, and it has eco and max. So if I set that on high and max, I would do that when running 240, and I went out and didn't know anything about the fridge, and that's typically what they're going to be set on when you get them. You'll go out and run it, and then the fridge will cut out, and then the battery might be sitting at 11.9 to 12 volt. And you'll think there's something wrong with the fridge, and you'll take it back to the manufacturer or take it back to the shop. It's not the fridge, it's the setting. So low, medium, high. If I set this on low and eco, okay, it's the most economical, that's going to cut out at 10.6 volt. We'll still get customers say that there's a fault with the fridge, and you'll get some fridges that cut out 11. It's not the fridge, it's the fridge is operating the way it's supposed to, and they operate because they don't want to drain your crank or your, say, AGM battery completely flat. Some of the fridges will have things like low voltage cutouts, and that's to protect your battery so it just doesn't keep draining it so it's dead flat. So that fridge there cuts out 10.6. I have another fridge, that's 95 litre. I've got another fridge which is 52 litre, and that will run down to 9 volt. Now that's fantastic if you're running lithium, because lithium doesn't really care. So AGM definitely does, and you don't want to run it past 50% of the battery because you'll damage your battery and have to buy another battery. So the point is that you need to understand how your fridge works. So let's look at a combination between a power source and a fridge. The question we'll get 99% of the time is how long my fridge run, okay? Are you going to keep it full? Are you going to put warm produce in it? Are you going up north? What's the ambient temperature? What is the temperature you're going to set the fridge at? Is it going to be run as a freezer or half freezer? Is it going to be run at 1 degree? Is it going to be run as a fridge? Massive difference between running a fridge at minus 15 degrees in the Pilbara with 50 degrees ambient temperature. And this happens, it happens a lot because people don't tell us exactly what they're doing with it. And they'll say the fridge is only running for half a day. That's about probably what you're going to get. Minus 15 degrees, running it up north, it's going to be needing so much power to run it, it's probably going to draw 8 amp. I know that big fridge will probably draw 7 or 8 amp an hour. And if you've got 100 amp hour, let's think if you had an AGM, for example, if you can only use 50 amp of that, and you're running at 7 amp an hour, or 7 into 50 is going to be, say 7 hours. That's normal. There's nothing wrong with the battery, there's nothing wrong with the fridge. But 99.9% of the time, customers or consumers will call back to either the refrigeration guys, the battery guys, and say there's a problem with my system, there's a problem with the battery, there's a problem with the fridge. Most of those problems can be sorted out by reading the instructions. And if you came to us and said, I think there's a problem with my fridge, and this is the voltage my fridge runs at. When it's on low, it cuts out at 10.6 and it cuts back in at 11 volt. And we can go, okay, what temperature are you running the fridge at? I'm running it as a fridge. What size is the fridge? Okay. How many amp an hour does it run on average at that temperature? These are answers that you should know before even asking a battery company or a fridge business if there's an issue. Understand those things first so you can come back and specifically say what you think the issue is, knowing the factors how the fridge runs. So a good example is if you use a Nomad V5. Nomad V5 starts at 12.6 volt and runs like a fuel gauge down. It'll cut out at 9 volt. But this fridge, for example, here cuts out at 10.6 and it won't cut back into around 11. There's nothing wrong with the fridge, it runs perfectly. There's nothing wrong with the Nomad, it's running perfectly. By the time it gets to 10.6, this is still well over half full. So there's nothing wrong with either of them. It's because you need to understand, well, when does that cut in and cut out? And do you need to keep this full? And if you do, how do you keep it full with what size panel or how much amp's going to go in? That's all it is. What's coming out and what's going in. What do I need replacing? Okay, based on the draw. And that's why you have draw and etc. and load on the Nomad to be able to see what that does. That's the V5. And we're just going to focus on the fridge right now. So if you're running one of these, you can use what they call step ups or step downs. And they're nothing really fancy. All they do is they take a voltage in. You would have seen these on us before. And they're a DC charger or a DC-DC voltage stabilizer. So all they do is just take a voltage in. These take 9 to 36 volt in. So as long as it sees 9 to 36 volt, it'll convert that to, and this one here's a 10 amp, 12.6 volt. So what I can do here is simply plug that into the Nomad, to the output, and it's going to say, okay, the Nomad's at what, 10 volt? So it sees 9 to 36 volt, and at the other end, it converts that to 10.6 volt. So all that your fridge is going to see is, all the fridge is going to see is 12.6 volt. So all I do here is I plug this into the Nomad, I plug this into the fridge, say over here, which I've got in the LivePO4, and that fridge will run down until this is dead flat, and I'll get another 2 days out of it. And that's simply called a step up. It's also called a DC-DC charger. We can also use these 5s, 10s and 20s. We can also make them go to 14.6 volt. So this over here is LivePO4. I can take 9 to 36 volt, which you get from your car, and I can convert that with a step up to 14.6. I can also use these to stabilise the current between the two, and that's another tube. We'll do it very shortly. That's about running in parallel, but how do you do it correctly? Because the question we come back to people is, look, why do you want a 24 volt? Why do you want this and that? What is it you're trying to achieve? What is it trying to do? So again, going back to the fridge, it's very important to understand how does your fridge work before you come back to, say, us. When you've got a combination, you might have a really good Waco or an Engel, or it can be any other brand. The actual issues that people have are not necessarily the cheap brands. It's really simple that they do not understand your fridge. There's a lot of posts online and they really belittle a lot of the suppliers of fridges. And we read through them, look, that's just because you never read the instructions. You didn't understand how the fridge worked, and the relationship and the type of technology that you're using is an AGM, lead acid and gel. Okay, and what is the range the battery can run at? If it can go down to 45 to 50%. Do you have a low voltage cutout in the fridge? Yes, no. What's the setting on the fridge? Low, medium, high, eco. So our fridges here, these 95s, we know cut out at 10.6, and that's fine. I can use this one here, the Nomad. If I've got a 200 watt panel, I know that fridge will run every day, all day, every day, set and forget, because it'll get topped up enough to keep that running, no problem, and it won't get under 11.8 because I'm running a 200 watt panel. It's never an issue because I understand what I'm doing. And that's when you can talk about what are the other technologies in lithium and batteries to make sure to get the most out of your fridge. So to get the most out of your fridge, the first thing we're going to say to you is please understand how your fridge works. Understand the ins and outs, and if you're not going to read instructions, don't read instructions on the video recorder. That's fine, but you need to know what's happening with your fridge, because you're going out and you can spend $1,000 in food and drinks and stuff like that, and it can go off because you didn't understand how your fridge worked and how to get it to kick back in. The other thing that I will mention is there's also something called voltage drop. And we'll get customers to say, look, the battery says it's 12 volt, but the fridge is saying it's 11. And we'll go, first thing we're going to say is, okay, how long is the run between the battery and the fridge? And have you cut into it? And if you have, what sort of wiring you're using? You might think it's a really silly question, question to ask, but are you using DC or AC cabling? It's very common for people to pick up a bit of cable around the house that the electricians left it from the wiring their 240 in their home, and then try and cable that into their fridge and wonder why there's a big massive voltage drop. It is quite common that people do that. So the longer the run, the bigger the voltage drop between the power source and the fridge. So that might be showing, say, say they're showing 10.8, and I've got a long run, and that cuts out 10.6. Customer will say, well, that should still run because that says 10.8. Why is the fridge not working? Voltage drop. We can do that and test with a multimeter and see exactly, we can show you the voltage out, the voltage at the other end, just voltage drop. Very, very common, but people don't think it's a real thing. It actually is. And the other common thing is people cutting into wiring and putting more resistance in. So the more connections you have, the more resistance and so on, you'll get more voltage drop. And also using wrong cabling, you'll get voltage drop. So again, with fridges, please understand that ambient temperature, the temperature outside, will affect the length of time that the fridge will run. The temperature that you've got it set for inside, is it running as a dual zone, sorry. Running fridge or freezer minus 15 and 1 degree, huge difference in draw and amp. That's why the batteries that we do, the Nomad, it gives you all the draw so you can start to learn about your system. And we always tell people, if you've got a brand new fridge and a power source and so on, it's extremely common for people to buy it the day before they're going on a trip. That's probably a really big mistake, especially if you don't know what you're doing, because unless you know what you're doing with the fridge and the way the relationships work, you're more than likely going to run into trouble. So I'm hoping that that's going to alleviate a lot of the issues you will have with fridges and understanding how the fridge works and how long it will run for. You've got to tell us as to what is the average amp hour that that fridge will draw in a 24-hour period based on the temperature you set it at. You can get that information from your instructions, you can get it from the manufacturer. If they haven't got instructions, you better just send them an email or make a phone call, they'll be able to tell you a guesstimate. Once you've got a guesstimate, you get an idea how long things will run, and then you can start to plan and work your off-grid system out correctly. So that's a fridge. I'm sure I'm going to get a million more questions about fridges, but that's specifically what's causing the issues, people not reading the instructions. And same with the batteries, we'll cover off in a moment. We'll talk about parallel or duals and multiple in lines, also stepping them up to 24 volts. So these DC step-ups that you can use, that can tell the fridge at one end it's always seen 12.6, it can show always 14.6 depending on the configuration. These are cheap enough. 10 amp one of these are great. You can use in your car, charge it. They can charge up your lithium as well, but they'll run your fridges quite happily. They're 150 bucks. They have multiple uses. They're great to have if you're out in the country, because if you get stuck out there and you've forgot all your charging equipment, you can grab one of these and plug it into someone else's sticker socket and plug and charge your battery sources up if you've got these. So these are called step-ups or AC or DC-DC, Sega DC, and you also have Anderson configurations. Like this one down the front here is a 20 amp, and we do 20 amps, 10s, 5s, and we do also 12.6 volt, 14.6 volt, and 24 volt. Depending on what you want to do. So again, stepping back to the fridge, just make sure you understand how your fridge works. So when you come and ask us a question about why it's doing something, you can actually tell us the information that we need. And it may not even be related to us, but if you're talking to a retailer, you need to go back to them and say, this is what my fridge should be doing, and this is its voltage range in and out. How's that battery source work? Is it just run down like a fuel gauge, and when does it cut in, cut out? These are things you should already know before you come back and ask a retailer as to potentially an issue, because 99.9% of the time it's not an issue with either of the products. It's normally about the understanding of how the fridge works. So again, I'm sure I'll get lots more questions about fridges. Contact at nomadpdu.com.au, or if it's fridge related, talk to the manufacturer to understand how the fridges work, its cut in, cut out, and at ambient temperature and certain temperature settings, how long will your fridge run? And that's the most important thing to know.